Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to this Scythe webcast webinar. Today is a little bit of a deviation from the norm. Instead of us doing the 4-hour workshops that you guys were kind of getting used to, we've got a quick little 1-hour webinar webcast where we're just going to talk about a topic with you, and we got some slides we'll run through. You guys have a chance to ask some questions, and then this one is going to turn into a full-fledged workshop here down the line, so stay tuned for that one. But with that being said, this webinar webcast is on Threat Emulation Engineering 101. We're going to walk you through the basics of kind of how to go about this whole process, what it is. It is being presented by myself, Trey, and my co-presenter, Tyler. We've got the fancy little Who Am I slides coming up here in a second. So I guess if we're not waiting on anything else, let's go ahead and dive in. So, who am I? My name is Trey. I am the lead adversarial engineer over here at Scythe. By trade, over the last 15 years, I've been everything from a red teamer to a threat hunter, an educator, developed a good bit of content at places like Hack the Box Academy. I've done a little bit of everything in this field so far. I'm a jack of all trades. I've got alphabet soup, certs, and things like that. If that's the kind of stuff you care about and you're interested in, you can check out what all's current at my LinkedIn. My Twitter is on the page as well. And our next one, I will let Tyler introduce himself.
Hey everybody, I'm Tyler Casey. I'm the detection engineer over here at Scythe. I've been doing defensive blue team defensive cyber operations for about 10 years now. I had a majority of my career on a cyber protection team, deploying all over the world, helping to fight against real incidents. And I also have my Twitter and LinkedIn down there if you guys want to connect or have any questions or anything.
Yeah, so that's who we are. So what are we covering? So today during this webinar, we're going to talk about threat emulation. What is it really and why do we care about it? We'll kind of talk about the process for you guys to get started down this path if it's something you're interested in. And then we'll drop some cool tools, resources, tricks, things like that to help you kickstart your journey. So threat emulation 101, what is it and why do we care? The little unicorn graphics are awesome. I love these things. So threat emulation itself, we're leveraging adversarial tactics, techniques, and procedures or behaviors, depending on who you're talking to, enhanced by cyber threat intelligence to create security testing based on real-world intrusion campaigns. That's a lot of soup, right? That's a lot of jargon. What's that really mean? So to break it down, we're taking knowledge about how threat actors in real life operate and using that information to create these realistic security tests and emulations. We're doing this to help improve our defenses. We're looking at things like security controls validation, and we're really looking at this as a targeted approach to testing, not just throwing the book at everything in your environment and seeing what you can see. And we've all been through pen tests before. We've been through vulnerability assessments. This is not that. We're really trying to be deliberate and targeted and ensure that we're providing value and helping improve our overall security posture as we go through threat emulation and, by a larger extent, purple team engagements. So if that's what we really mean, what's it not? It's not a pen test. We're not here to poke and prod at every little thing. This is not an opportunity for you to wreak havoc in your environment. Owning the domain is not the key goal here. We're not just trying to steal creds, get a golden ticket, call it a day, right? Will password spraying really, all our users really help improve anything except just make a lot of people mad, and now they have to go reset some passwords? And this is also not a chance to test out new CVEs in production. That's not the point here. What we're really trying to do is to provide value by engineering tests that are going to help determine if what our organization's nightmares really are possible, and if they are possible, help to identify and fix the gaps that enable it to happen. So we talked about what threat emulation engineering is. We've talked about what it's really not. What are the core components? What are we looking at here when we think about this as a concept? We've got to go through and define what a threat is to us in our organization. We're going to have to gather intelligence about it, see what's out there historical or stuff maybe we've seen in-house. Once we have that information, we're going to have to enrich it and use it to develop capabilities that we can use to actually put it to work and test against our organization. From there, we want to debrief and improve. We want to make sure that this is not a one-stop shop, right? We want to continuously improve as a team and as an organization and keep everything progressing forward. Does this make sense to you guys so far? Nothing crazy, nothing groundbreaking. So with that in mind, that's what it is. That's what we're talking about. Let's go ahead and get into the process. Let's do the thing. What are we trying to do here? Well, that first step we said was defining our threat, right? For those of you that have been around for a while, you've probably seen this Twitter post before from Casey Ellis, and it's awesome. It's kind of breaking down the differences between like a threat actor, a threat, a vulnerability, and a risk. So all of these kind of line up to all of the other jargon we use in this field when we're talking about vulnerabilities, exploits, CVEs, risk, likelihood, threats, all of these things. We're saying the same thing using different words. So what we're really looking to do here is define that threat, the who and why to our organization, their capability and their potential opportunities, the how of that threat portion, and the likelihood of them being able to take advantage of anything and actually become a threat to us. When we think about it in this perspective, things like an exploit, that's a capability, that's something that can be used. The vulnerability itself is an opportunity, and a threat is the risk and likelihood they combine with human intent to turn into something actionable. We've got that broken down into a nice little chart here for you guys. When we're thinking about threats to ourselves and our organizations, we really have to look into, well, first, who even has the capability to be a threat to us? Who has the tools, the procedures, and the ability to make something happen? Our defensive complexity will make the level of threat we face raise, and this is going to knock a lot of the low-hanging fruit kind of off the board for us, so we don't have to really think about them. The next piece is going to be who has opportunity. We can control this piece ourselves. Our layered security, patching, putting solid controls in place, and proper education for our users can really help reduce that risk profile, that opportunity for a threat to actually become a threat. And then lastly, who has hostile intent against us and our organization? Is this something like insider threat? Maybe it's a competitor, criminal actors, nation state stuff. Do you know? How do you figure that out? With all of this combined, we can determine our threat landscape. And to kind of answer these questions, on this next slide, we've got a few here to help us kind of build this picture. We call it taking a look in the terminal. Trying to be fancy punny here. First one being, so do we have info that anyone cares about? Are we the kind of organization that retains or creates a lot of intellectual property? Maybe we work in a field that we retain a lot of customer or end user PII and PHI. Maybe we've got a huge customer database, customer information that we store that people would like to get their hands on, stuff like that. The next piece of this is, do we conduct business, say, in contested regions or in a region that's often targeted by specific threats? If we can understand that, that kind of narrows our window a little more, right? Now that we've thought about what do we have, where are we, what's our actual market? Are we in the industrial complex? Are we in defense, financial, medical? Are we working in critical infrastructure, power generation, these kind of things? Knowing what our market niche is tied with everything else will really help us bring that scope even closer, because now it's not going to be just, well, anything can be a threat. It's these are the people that would care about us. And with it also, what have we already seen internally? Have we been targeted previously? This may not be your organization's first breach, so you'll have firsthand data of what's hit you, what they've done, and who could potentially care about your environment, right? And then really at the end of the day, there's other stuff out there, kind of like the new hotness, like Log4j's, the Citrix, Okta, all of these other like vulnerabilities and 0 days and craziness that's happened, right? That kind of stuff does play into this picture. It does matter for our overall threat landscape, because we have to understand what kind of tools, hardware, software, all of this kind of stuff we're running in our environments, because it does increase our threat landscape. But at the end of the day, what's our worst nightmare look like? What are we really afraid of? Answering these questions will really help us determine the threats we're going to try and emulate and engineer from. Now, why do we care about all of this? This is kind of one of those things where if we understand our threat landscape, who cares about us, what can potentially be done, we can really provide better value, better impact as engineers building these threats to test against. Because we want to test against something that's realistic for us, not just very generic, very open-minded threats that it could be anything happening to anyone, because it's not helpful. There's not meaningful impact there. So with all of those questions in mind, maybe you've answered them yourself while we're kind of going through this webcast. Think about who could potentially be a threat to you. If you're more worried about your intellectual property, maybe customer data, PII, PHI, those kind of things, and you're afraid of someone getting a hold of trade secrets or the stuff you have going on, you might fall more into that espionage realm. So you start thinking, okay, our potential threats are going to be like insider threat. It's going to be corporate espionage from a competitor. It might be nation state actors, depending on the industrial base you're in. If it's more one of those things where you're just really worried about like ransomware or like criminals for hire or just doing something funky, maybe you're in the education field or you're in health, medical, these kind of things. So you would be thinking more along a cybercrime mindset and looking for those style of threats or threat actors. Lastly, you've got hacktivism. So if you're really worried about things like lone wolves, radicals, terrorists, or maybe hacktivism doesn't even have to look like these crazy, scary words, right? This could be maybe you just work in a market that has a lot of turmoil right now. So think like maybe the pharmaceutical or the cosmological market. Maybe you're in oil and gas where there's a lot of people that protest your products and your organizations and what you do. It's more likely that you would fall under this scope of hacktivism where you'll have lone wolves or other groups that are going to empower themselves and target you. So keep this whole picture in your mind of what your organization is, what your potential threats could be as you go through this process yourself. It's going to help you really drive forward what you build and engineer. So we've defined kind of what threat engineering is, right? We've defined the type of threats that we would see, how to determine what a threat to us would be. And now we need to gather an actual actionable intelligence against them, right? Let's see what's out there in the world. How do we emulate them? So through these next few slides, we're going to talk to you guys about how to gather quality intel. We'll talk about what actionable, that's a mouthful, intelligence is, and how you can go about kind of building this yourself and enriching the data you can find in the world. The caveat I want to put here, and the thing I really want you to think about is we want to be realistic as possible, staying true to the threats that we have determined are matter to us. But sometimes in there, we might have to fill in the blank. So you're going to have to be able to be flexible and be creative at times. So looking at intelligence, what's actionable? Our first example over here on the left, it's not very helpful, right? It's not giving us any real like procedures, any behaviors. It's not giving us examples of what they did in the environment. It's just a very generic, well, we take this very seriously. We think your security is of the highest importance. And if you're doing things like setting poor passwords, that's bad. Threat actors will take advantage of that. This isn't very clear or actionable reporting for us, right? This isn't something we can really take advantage of or use to engineer something new. Over here on the right, we're getting a little better. We can now see there's some tactics and stuff like that higher level listed, but it's still a large gap for us to cover before we can take this and make it actionable. Because when we start thinking about like seeing these tags and you're thinking about MITRE ATT&CK, the difference in these overall like tactics and procedures on these tags could be the difference of one different behavior you might see to 50. So there's a huge window here of stuff that we could potentially emulate. And we want to try and narrow this scope down a little further to make it actually useful to us. With what we see on the right, you've really got to read between the lines. So what's our best case scenario? we see something like this, right? you dive into a CTI report, they're talking about someone like, let's say, the Medusa ransomware, and you see this magical little block in the bottom that says, under these campaigns, they're stopping these services, and they give you the command of exactly what they did. This is what we'd hope to see, right? This is our golden ticket. This is giving us clear and actionable CTI. This is something we can take and use in our own campaigns and emulate. When we're looking at this, it says, okay, know what? They're using the net command, right? They're using it to stop services. And we can tell based on the context of the services they're stopping, even after just a little bit of research and Googling, if you don't recognize some of these, we can tell that they're stopping anything that might be a potential roadblock for that threat to continue on during their kill chain, whether that's through lateral movement or privilege escalation, persistence, anything like that. So we now know what they did, how they did it, and why they were doing it. This is very useful to us. And we can glean all of that through very few words. It just has to be clear and concise and helpful. Is this making sense? I know we're moving kind of quick here. Cool. Yep. So, awesome. Thank you guys. Liking the thumbs up here. Until you guys are still paying attention and listening, not just throwing me in a side screen and going back to your daily job. All right. So yeah, that's our best case scenario. This is what we would hope to see in the reporting. Maybe you get some extra mind maps for how things played out. You get a full kill chain breakdown. Stuff like that is extremely helpful. And that's the stuff you're really looking for. So as we're thinking about these, as we're trying to think about our threat, about how we're going to engineer, we're going to find actionable CTI, we've now got a new issue. Where do we find good quality CTI? With that in mind, we put together a quick little list for you and some stuff to show off that would be potentially helpful for the aspiring threat engineer. CISA, their alerts and advisories, they're constantly putting out all kinds of alerting and reporting on everything from threat actors to new 0 days of CVEs, anything and everything you can think of, they're throwing out to the world by now. I keep a feed for CISA and Slack in our chats and stuff, and it's going off constantly all day long. There's something new. So for us, that's really good. People in the world are actually reporting. We're seeing more visibility. Like we're in a great position now that we've got a ton of content that we could potentially go through. But we also now have a ton of content we can go through. So if you know kind of what you're looking for already, or you just want a feed to give you some highlights and some new stuff, CISA is a great place to look at. Next, DFIR report. We've put them on this list because they give really great insight into the threat actors and these campaigns and everything that's happening. It's solid reporting. And in my personal opinion, the reason I like them is they do really great with visualizations and mind maps of what's going on through that campaign. They're not just throwing a bunch of words in like a 500-word blog and leaving you alone. I'm a very visual person. So being able to like see that map, see how the attack flowed is extremely helpful. And the DFIR report does a great job at this. Google Tag, their threat analysis group, they just have generalized great reporting. They're a good place to start looking if you have an idea of what you're looking for. So I couldn't recommend them more. This one you see here on this fancy little screenshot on the screen, this is from a page called start.me. This was made by InfoSec Ninja. He's got a whole setup, and we'll include the link in the slides so you guys will have it. Breakdown, think of like a dashboard already with a bunch of different threat feeds from everyone from like CrowdStrike, Mandiant, Unit 42, everyone you could think of is piled right here into this page, and you can go through and see their latest reporting and click in and get a nice little starting point from there. It's a great way if you don't have a ton of feeds already to get started. The last couple, so MITRE ATT&CK. This one, if you don't feel like using like this start.me page, if you don't feel like digging through a ton of crazy reports right now, you just want to start trying to emulate a threat and get some practice. MITRE's attack page has a new section up there. It's not new, but it's new enough that has a bunch of reporting and CTI on some of the larger named threat actors and APT groups. They really break it down nicely. There's a lot of good information about the naming schemas. There's historic reporting on some of the larger actors that's there. And it's really nice because all of this is tied into their TTP mappings. So if you wanted to see like, hey, what actions does Orange Worm take? What happened in that campaign? You could easily go look at it, find it through there, and it's already tagged and mapped for you. So it's something you could easily replicate. We just wanted to take a minute to talk about this to give you guys an idea of, well, where could you find good quality CTI? The other thing I want to mention that's not on this slide, but we'll put into, it's in the notes, you'll have it. We've all heard the crazy naming schemas around threat actors, right? Or just threats in general. Every company has their own taxonomy. They might use elements or minerals or weather patterns or regional based things named after animals. We've all heard of these crazy different naming schemas. There's a Google Doc spreadsheet that's out there that's been made by the community that's a really good lexicon of, okay, who's using what name of schemas, what threat actors or regions do they apply to, and what do they target? Yeah, there we go. Tyler's dropping them now into the chat. So if you're looking for that correlation of names to actors to who's tracking them as what, to be able to kind of determine what you wanted to do if that's a threat that you're interested in, that link is really great for starting to figure that out. It's especially helpful when you think about places like Microsoft and their threat research. They just recently, at the end of 2023, changed their naming lexicon. So if you're familiar with it, if you knew what the old names were, they don't match the new. And this is an easy way for you to kind of see how those match up. Let's see, questions. Jonas, yes, slides and stuff will be shared. Usually it's about a day or so after the webinar ends. You guys will see them come out if you registered. Any questions so far before we move on? Cool. Yeah, I know I'm moving kind of quick, but we got a lot of content I really wanted to talk to you guys about because it's a very complex thing we're trying to do, but we need to make sure we understand what it's really going to take. So we've talked about gathering that CTI. We've talked about where to find it. Let's talk about some potential hurdles we might face. So we want to really be aware of what we're doing as we're building these emulations and as we're performing testing, that any web shells like exploit usage that might create a callback or disable something like, say, disable antivirus or any other security measures, any holes that we open as the testers, we want to do that with caution and only if necessary, and also document everything we do. We need to ensure that we're going back afterwards and we're closing any of these holes that we opened during testing. Here we go, sorry. Any place which can provide help in formulating procedures as per NCELs. So I believe what you're asking here, is there any way to really like take procedures or behaviors that we see and formulate those into something actionable? A really good place to start there would be something like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you have an idea of what that procedure or behavior is, you could find it in the MITRE ATT&CK framework itself. And from there, it's going to give you several different options of what could potentially be ran, what's been seen in real life and in stuff that's been previously reported. The other place you could go, if you have a general idea of the tactic or the procedure that you're trying to run, there's a cool little tool we were going to talk about here in a bit, or a resource called Atomic Red Team that has a good chunk of these kind of already pre-canned that might take small minor configurations, and you can run those as a good starting point. Did that answer your question? Cool. All right, yeah. So we really want to make sure that we're paying attention to everything we do as an engineer, everything that we're going to prep and stage and build into this threat profile. Because as we do something, it might be helpful, might provide value to that test, but it might also open a hole. If we don't go back and fix it, we might just be the reason something happens, right? Or that we suffer a breach. So document, 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 and make sure you use caution in anything you do. The next piece, so we're going to have to also accept there won't always have the full picture here when we're thinking about CTI. A lot of reporting is either intentionally very vague because of the sensitivity or the nature of the breach and who was breached, or during the investigation and the incident response, the actor might have did a lot of cleanup, covered their tracks. Just sometimes the whole picture is not there, right? There's a lot of different reasons that you wouldn't see something reported on in an incident. And a lot of times, not everybody releases everything. A lot of these other organizations and companies tend to hold a lot of their own threat intel close to the chest because that's their bread and butter. So they're not going to give it out to the world. That's something that gives them a leg up when they're building out new things and detections and their platforms and all of that. So when we face these gaps, we're going to kind of have to use our imagination to fill them in. We're going to have to make a conscious choice of a replacement for that part of your potential kill chain. And we're doing this because we want our defenders to be able to see those logical steps and the progressions of an incident so that you can determine if there is a visibility gap there or if something's misconfigured, broken, not working the way it's supposed to. We're trying to bolster our defenses and our defenders in the end. That's our whole purpose here. The other thing to keep in mind and to think about is CTI data is very much historic. These reports are coming out weeks, if not months, if not sometimes years later. So they're not necessarily going to represent current threat actor capabilities. And keeping this in mind as we're developing and engineering our threats, we might have to make changes and replace some of the stuff we're deciding we're going to use based on updates to our operating systems, maybe the software or hardware we're using, all kinds of different little things that can make a difference, right? So it could be something as simple as at the time that the report was coming out, they were only using, say, normal 64-bit Windows, but now you're running things on ARM, you're using different platforms, maybe you're using thin clients. So you want to emulate the threat, but your systems don't exactly match. You're going to have to tailor that yourself and fill that gap in. And with that, those old TTPs, they're probably no longer going to be functional, especially when you have something like an architecture change, right? So you'll have to kind of go through, maybe look at MITRE ATT&CK, look at other places and find a replacement to fill that slot and to give you that full value. So we went through that whole spiel. We're talking about CTI. Now that we've got an idea of what our threats look like, we've gathered some intelligence, we need to put it to use, right? Let's start developing capabilities. Question, Jared. So do you recommend running these tests in production similar to how a pen test would, or in a sandbox images that mimic production? Exposure is something my org is really concerned about, so we're looking to minimize it while making our test comprehensive as possible. I mean, obviously, the correct answer here is always, if you have the capability to have a sandbox or a test environment that you can run these in and test in, that should always be option number one. With keeping in mind that there's almost always going to be the chance of deviation from your testing environment to prod. So unless the engineers and architects that are maintaining one are maintaining both and doing it in tandem, what you see and what you do in a testing environment or a sandbox might not necessarily match what's the ground truth in your production, right? But this is a really good question that we could lead in before I go further to the thought of trust. In the end, we need to build trust with our teams, right? With our defenders, so that they understand we're not here just to steamroll them, give them a report that's not helpful and walk away. Maybe we start doing small targeted testing in something like a sandbox or a virtual environment you've stood up just locally on a host or something, so they can see what you're doing, what the effect is, and that you can produce something actionable for them to help improve defenses. From there, maybe you can move into testing and targeted hosts in prod. Maybe you've got one host you stood up that mimics a normal user, another host that mimics a server, and you run with that. And that's going to be a really easy way for you to show impact to that environment, but not directly affect your users or the infrastructure in place. Because from that point, you're still going to be able to test a lot of stuff or other capabilities like C2, ingress and egress, all kinds of other things that you may not necessarily be able to test in a lab environment. Answer your question, Jared? Cool. All right. So yeah, let's talk about developing capabilities. And when we think about this, we know what our ideal threat is. We know have some intel on it and how it works. Let's get to work. Let's think about some capabilities we need to consider here. It's a bit of a long list, right? There's a lot of stuff as an engineer that we'd have to take into account when you think about a full kill chain. Everything from the pre-compromise all the way through post-compromise actions. There's a lot that can go on. You've got a lot of network level stuff, host level stuff. There's a lot to take into account. So take it in a phased approach. Don't just try and tackle the whole thing all at once, because it's going to be extremely stressful. You're going to crash and burn. Pick a point and start there. Test from that and expand as you go. You don't have to do it all at the same time. But some of the stuff we would be thinking about here is think like that stage 0, that initial access payloads. How did the initial incident happen? Was it a macro document that got sent to a user? They opened it up, maybe some links, DLLs, all kinds of craziness. Maybe you hit a watering hole. Pick your flavor of initial compromise, right? You're going to need some form of this. And this could be something that maybe at the stage you're at, you decide to skip it altogether, right? We've all heard that whole term of let's just post compromise, or we're just gonna white card this in. We're gonna call it a day. We're gonna say a breach happened, the user clicked a thing, you're in, and you're dropped. That's a very valid way to go about testing, because it might be too much to build that capability to have a full, say, phish campaign started into the environment. Because who knows, maybe your user is really good and they won't actually click on something, and you're going to be sitting around twiddling your thumbs waiting for a user to do it, and it never happens. You can save your time, you can save the expense and the headache of trying to build out that whole part of the campaign and white card it, as long as you understand at some point that's something you did and it needs tested on. But then that moves us down the line when we're thinking about things like stagers. So like the downloader, the implants themselves, how are you getting those into the environment? Do you need any infrastructure as you're engineering these threats? Does your threat actor you're trying to mimic use really extensive C2, or maybe they're doing C2 through something like an Azure web app or API portal? Maybe they're using redirectors. They're using a bunch of different domains. Maybe they're using one for initial compromise, one for short-term C2, one for long-term C2. There's a lot of stuff to take into account here, and this stuff all takes time to set up. From there, now we're kind of already in the environment, right? We're thinking post-compromised. What else is happening? So now, does your threat really like using custom implants? Is this something you can replicate? Or maybe they really like doing a lot of living off the land and the low level hanging fruit, things that they don't have to bring in crazy tooling. They don't have to do anything really time consuming and expensive. That's what the name of the game really is, right? It's money. What's the cost? How do you replicate it? And for them, how can they have the biggest impact for the least amount of effort and time and money? So maybe you're replicating living off the land stuff. You're using common tools like Mimikatz, Impact PS Empire. Are they using any kind of proxies, any kind of redirection internal? Or is your biggest nightmare ransomware? How are you going to replicate and emulate that? And then you get down to things like payload generators. How are you going to enable persistence? How are you going to ensure that you can bypass AV and EDR and ensure that you can keep in that environment? These are all things we need to think about and consider for the sake of like realism, replayability, flexibility, and overall just the reliability of our testing, right? We want to make sure that we are staying true to that threat. So here we go, and go ahead and throw this quick little advertisement in here. If all of that sounded super overwhelming to you, here at Scythe, we have our own platform where we can help you do this, and you can even do this yourself straight from the cloud, where you could go ahead and use existing threats that we're developing over here on the ProServe team in Scythe Labs. You can use any kind of different MITRE attack techniques, Atomic Red Team stuff. We've got a bunch of custom modules and a lot of these capabilities that we just listed off built into the platform for you. So it's a really great way to get you started if you're just sitting here going, I don't know what to do with my hands, right? We have all of this stuff there for you to already go ahead and start emulating those threats that you're afraid of and taking those actions to help improve your defenders. Our modules are awesome. We have a bunch more coming out all the time. And even with this, if you need a little more help in gathering that intel, we've got what we call our crew over here on ProServer. We do this thing called Empower as a service. We're helping generate threats for you. We're generating a good chunk of actionable IOCs, not just here's a list of IPs, go make sure they're blocked. We're generating all these different kind of things. We're running purple team exercises with people, and we're helping them get through this whole emulation engineering piece and get over this hurdle so they can get started and then get them comfortable in running and doing this on their own. I mean, just in my short time of being here, we've already had some customers transition off into doing their own things, and it's been awesome to see them grow. So keep us in mind if this is something you're really concerned about and something you want to start on. We're here to help. We can help you get through it. Okay, now we're through that. So how can we emulate all of these capabilities we've been talking about, whether it's using our platform or maybe you're trying to home grow it yourself, you're trying to build your own thing from scratch, right? How are we going to map those capabilities that the adversary had to our own emulation capabilities? Things to think about here is, okay, are the tools they're using and we're seeing in reporting readily available? Are they using stuff like just basic PowerShell and command prompt, or are they using custom crazy tool sets? Are they developing stuff that you're seeing on the news nowadays, all these crazy implants and tooling that's meant to just take over the world in a single button click, right? The stuff might not be, one, safe to use, but two, easily available for your use. And if it is available, you probably don't want to run it anyway. So how could you replicate that? Is there another route you could take? If we can't mimic those procedures, if we can't take that capability and turn it into an emulation of our own, what variations can we do? How can we go about doing this? And if nothing else, you can turn around and build your own capability. But things to think about here is, I mean, nobody's got time for that. That takes a lot of time, effort, money, engineers, devs, time to test, time to validate. It's really hard to do. But if you've got that kind of time and money, go ahead and do it. I'm sure somebody would love to get paid to develop new capabilities. This is put here so you think about it, and I want people to get away from this mindset that we have to be rigid. We have to do exactly what the threat did. No, you don't. Because one, you may not actually know. Two, you may not have the capability, whether it's through experience, time, or tooling. So be flexible, make some changes. You can easily go through MITRE ATT&CK, look at that same tactic, and decide to use a different behavior or procedure to provide similar impact. When you're thinking about developing these capabilities, you can really start simple and grow in the complexity over time as your organization needs. Maybe you start as simple as having just a bunch of PowerShell one-liners, like a click me script that'll do stuff one by one. You're sitting on a host right there and you're just putting them into the terminal. That's fine, perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be an APT overnight. But you can go from that, like you see up here at the top, just a little quick PowerShell command, to something like building a custom payload or implant that once it's executed, it takes a bunch of follow-on steps and actions. It performs recon on its own. It might have impact steps. You can get there, but that doesn't mean you have to be that from go. It is perfectly acceptable for you to just be you and your crew sitting there typing commands in. I really want to dispel that myth that you have to be this elite red team person to develop threats. You don't. You really don't. With this though, as I'm saying, start simple and grow in complexity, the same thing should apply to the threats you're emulating. If this is something new to your organization or your environment, is it really kind of a smart thing to start here with doing like building crazy custom payloads, using unmanaged PowerShell, doing all of these other things from start when you don't even really know if your organization can detect an alert on the basics like a user opening command prompt or even running PowerShell commands in the clear? Is that stuff that's being logged? Do you know? So building that strong foundation, starting simple, starting with the easy stuff first is going to provide a ton of impact and help and benefit to your organization. If nothing else, it's going to validate your tools that you have in place for security are already doing what they're supposed to do. It's going to validate that you're getting logs from your endpoints into your SIEM. It's going to validate that all your tools are working as they properly should and that your defenders are taking action as necessary. So just because your threat that you're developing and the way you're actioning it isn't complex doesn't mean it's not providing value, which is our end goal, right? You can go from those simple living off the land capabilities and from there move forward to using just free and open source tooling. Maybe you start getting into some of the custom payload creations or a lot of the automation tooling. It's okay to grow over time. That, like I said, that end goal is really there to help your defenders determine if they can identify these behaviors, take action on them, and make sure the organization works as a whole. So we did all this craziness, we gathered intel, we developed our threat. Now we got to put it to work, right? Now we have to be the threat. See the threat, be the threat. We've done our research. Now let's put it to use. This next slide, I think, is going to throw several people off because they're going to expect some crazy pitch here about how to execute and to use these threats we've built, right? Well, that's not what this webinar is about today. I'm not telling you how to do that job. We're here to tell you and talk to you about how to be the engineer, how to start developing it so that you can run these exercises. But I want people to keep in mind is being a threat doesn't always have to be technical. This could be something where you're still trying to build trust with your organization to even allow you to do these kind of things, right? How could you expect them to take action in production if you've never done any kind of security testing before? That's kind of a tough card to pull there. But you don't always have to be technical. Tabletop scenarios are a great way to test your organization's response and capabilities. And they're going to provide you with a great opportunity to test your defenders without causing any impact to the network, to your environment, your users, none of that. It's just testing procedures, response times. What do you have documented? And it can even be a good thought experiment of, do you know what you can see and what you can't see? Do you think whatever this potential threat or problem is viable for you to see? Is it visible? Is our documentation up to date? Does everyone know their plan, know what the plan is if an incident happens? Do they know what their role is in that plan? All of that matters too. And it is just as much being the threat as you being hands-on keyboard, just going at it and killing it. You don't always have to do that. It could be something as simple as this. Analyst reports a large amount of PowerShell commands logged on a host after an attachment was opened. What do we do next? You've effectively giving them a potential scenario. It has some form of threat to the environment, and you have to determine, is this actionable? Do we do something with it? And this provides us a lot of easy way to ask further, like follow-on probing questions, right? So like, what logs could tell us what was executed? What was ran first? How did we even see this? Can we determine what's being ran? Has that host communicated with any other host internally since the initial execution? Can we notice something like maybe a heartbeat or potential C2 from it to external? And should we classify this as an incident? Do we start our IR process? Who needs notified first? All of this kind of stuff is helping in this whole process, right? You're still doing the thing. You're just not hands-on keyboard. Just wanted to throw that out there first because a lot of people don't like hearing that and they really think they have to be elite red teamer, and you really don't. You just got to have a bit of imagination. But with all of that in mind, taking action, you don't have to have crazy C2 platform. You don't have to pay for Cobalt Strike or build custom implants, all of that to get started to do your thing. It's okay to use RDP. The threats use it all the time. Why shouldn't you? This is a common thing I've seen in a ton of reporting, and I'm sure you guys have too, where they compromise an initial user and the route in was through something like AnyDesk TeamViewer. They were just using remote desktop and traversing through another user's computer. And that's how they maintained comms. That's how they did all of their actions. There's no need to be this super elite APT. You don't have to be a crazy hacker to develop and emulate these threats. It could be as simple as you driving on a VM through RDP or however you want to do it. And from there, moving into different frameworks. Maybe you start establishing actual C2 communications because you're at that point that you're ready to start testing network defenses. Can you see, say, malicious behavior? Can you see where what DNS is being queried? Are they potentially being blocked? Do you have good block lists? Do you have good allow lists? Like what's going on? The goal here is to be methodical, follow a kill chain, and ensure that you're building a threat that allows your defenders to progress and grow and validate their protections that are in place for you, right? that complexity doesn't always equal up to a great test. So the last thing I want to talk to you on this slide here that's really important, and this is something I think a lot of people fail at, just stay within the agreed upon scope. If you told your defenders that this test was going to be ran on 2 hosts, 2 explicit hosts, this is what you were going to do, and this would be the end of the test. Here's your start dates, your end dates, all of that fun stuff. Do the exact thing you said. When you start spreading out into other hosts and causing potential alerts and incidents, now you're just giving them more headache and time wasted, because now they're chasing a false threat when in reality it's you going out of scope. Trust goes a long way in this field, especially as a red teamer, as you're starting to try and get into purple teaming and doing threat emulation. If you can't do what you say you're going to do, they're not going to allow you to continue. You're not going to have a job for very long, right? So one more thing for you guys. So don't get so distracted trying to emulate that threat that you forget to be one yourself. We talked about gathering quality CTI and intel. We talked about using it to develop these threats. I see it from a lot of people, and I've heard it quite a bit. I actually posted about this on Twitter the other day, that I'm seeing people getting so caught up on trying to be the threat they're trying to emulate and engineer a test for, that they forget that these threat actors are also still human beings. They're dynamic in nature. They're going to pivot and change as they need to. Why would a threat actor just blatantly ignore some glaringly obvious vulnerability that's on the environment, on your organization, if it's going to be beneficial to them? Remember, time, effort, money. They're trying to make sure they do it as quick, as fast, as easy as possible for the least cost. So they're going to adapt to you and your organization and use that to their advantage. In your testing, you really should do the same. If through one threat it comes out that like maybe there's a critical vulnerability on one of your hosts that you've been testing against, for the next one, adapt, use it, show why it's an impact and how it can be used against you. Show how you can fix it. Help them see that visibility gap. Don't just ignore it because the threat actor you're trying to emulate never used that particular exploit in real life. Have an open mind, right? So last piece here, debrief and improve. We've done all of the things, we've developed some really cool threats and we used them, we ran them. Now we need to actually come back and sit down with our teams, talk with our defenders. We want to provide that benefit to them, not just throwing attacks for the walls, right? Our documentation here is key, and we really just need to continuously answer that question for ourselves. Am I providing value? Am I helping them validate security controls? Did we test any logging capabilities? Did we help improve them? Did we generate new detections because of this test? Did we solve and close any visibility gaps or coverage? We want to ensure that we cover these bases and we can not only engineer, develop the threat, use the threat, but show the value it provides in the end. We want to continuously think of how we can bolster our defenses and how we can improve ourselves as that threat emulation engineer. With that in mind, celebrate the wins on the blue side and the red. If you're performing these threats, if you're on the red side of the whole purple team aspect and blue gets a good stop, that's not a bad thing for you. Is it frustrating? Yeah, because what you planned didn't quite work and now you've got to improvise. But that's still a win. That's showing something's working. A defense you put in place is taking the correct action. It's doing what it's supposed to do. That's a win. Celebrate that with them. Don't just let them go off and say, yeah, whatever, you got us there, but then we did X, Y, and Z. One, that's just bad manners, but two, like, your end goal there is to help them, right? So you really want to let them have that sense of accomplishment and really feel like what they're doing matters, because a lot of times people just beat up on the defender all the time. You're looked at as a cost center. Same thing with like help desk. No one's really happy until you've got something broke, right? Then they matter. Then you're really happy they're there to help you. So celebrate those wins with them. With the thought of debrief and improving, metrics. Metrics matter. Your leadership really likes metrics. You got to be able to prove that a thing was helpful, right? That it's doing its job, that something worked as expected. As you're generating these threats, you now have this targeted scenario and window where you know everything's going to happen. It's not quite a vacuum, but you at least know that X, Y, and Z should happen. So we should be able to see that with this. Keeping that stuff in mind, as long as you're collaborating with your teams, the time to log your detections, your alerts, it's gonna get smaller and smaller and smaller. You're going to be able to validate, see things faster, know if it's a false positive or an actual incident, and take action when necessary. These metrics, they're going to reveal those gaps to you as you're doing the thing. If you take an action and there's no alert generated, there's no logs written, these are the kind of things like you can see right on the spot. You're going to know. Logging that, documenting it, keeping that metrics gives a roadmap for what needs fixed, how to improve, but also shows where the wins are. It's all making sense to you guys? I know that was a lot. We're getting close to time here. We ran through the whole threat emulation engineering process in about 50 minutes, which wasn't bad. I was thinking this was going to take about 35, so my timing worked out better. Let's go into a few resources. How can you guys get started? What can be helpful for you to kind of kickstart this capability building, right? We've got first four here as resources, MITRE ATT&CK, TTPs galore. If you're unsure, you can use the attack mapper or their navigator, pick a couple things. Maybe you're just wanting to get used to how it works. Pick a couple pieces or behaviors from each part of a kill chain, and boom, you've got a threat. It's an easy way to start. There's a ton of good info in there, and it gives you a good base, at least to start with research. Next one, Atomic Red Team. So this is a really good spot to get started if the capability of running things, because not everybody's a red teamer, right? Maybe you're a blue teamer trying to bring this capability into the group. There's a lot of really good atomic tests that are pre-built that allow you to start testing from go. They have write-ups with them to tell you what it does, how it does it, and how the whole process works for you. Some of them might require a bit of prep work, but most can be ran right out the box. Next up here, Purple Team Exercise Framework. If purple teaming sounds like something that's really in your wheelhouse, something you guys think you should be doing in your environment, here at Scythe, we've got a whole framework put up to help you guys really start from A to Z, build the whole program. It's going to basically walk you through the whole process from getting that initial buy-in all the way to the out brief from your exercises you guys start running. It's a great resource. There's a lot of documentation in there, spreadsheets, little kickstart guides, and how you can start easily generating new CTI yourself, enriching it, using it to build threats. We've packaged it all in a nice little place that is that Purple Team Exercise Framework for you guys. Next on here would be CISA. You've heard me talk about them a couple of times up to this point. Just wanted to make sure I mentioned them again because they really are a treasure trove of information and people should be paying attention more. I think people turn a blind eye because they think of it as just another government agency. They're actually they're in our realm, they're trying to help, they're doing something good. Pay attention to it. Tools. So a couple things to help you get started. If you're really big in a Windows environment, you're going through and you need a way to quickly emulate and use, say, specific network stop protocols you typically see in Windows environments. Packet provides you a big collection of Python classes to help you easily emulate those capabilities you've seen in reporting. And they've done it in a way that it's easy to use and it doesn't require a ton of like tooling or development on your end to take advantage of it. If you're looking to go that freeware route when you're thinking about C2 frameworks as a whole, I wanted to give a shout out to Empire C2 because they're one that I use in my own personal home labs and stuff. I love it as a C2 framework. There's a lot of good capability and it works great. And it's actively in production and being developed. So you can't go wrong, especially with something free, right? Metasploit framework. All of these crazy exploits and CVEs and stuff you read about in an exploit database, they all end up in here eventually. So there's a ton of capability pre-canned right out the bat in Metasploit framework for you to utilize to start developing and improving the threats that you're trying to emulate. Lastly, GitHub. Yeah, it's a crazy code repository, but there's so much out there that people are sharing with the world and people are sleeping on. You can always go back through here and search. Looking at anything awesome red teaming or awesome threat intel, awesome purple teaming are great places to start if you're looking for capabilities, if you're looking for research, if you're looking for ways to do new things. I do this all the time trying to see what's new and upcoming. What could I incorporate into my own engineering process? And then lastly, Scythe, us, right? If all else fails, if you're not sure where you want to go and you want a more guided approach, we're here for you. Don't forget about us. We'll keep doing these workshops. Hopefully you guys got some benefit from this. You learned something new today and look to see this get turned into a full-fledged workshop here soon where you guys will get to actually step through the process with me, not just talk about it for the day. And with that being said, thank you. You guys have any questions? Thank you, everybody. Tyler, you got anything you want to touch on? You want to throw at them before we let everybody go for the day?
Yeah. Hey, Trey. Hey, everybody. The only thing that I really had, and Trey had hit on it, but as I'm a blue team guy. I'm not really as much of a red teamer. I've been through a ton of red team exercises and penetration tests and been a part of it. Had some good ones and bad ones, but the main thing that always makes the good ones good or great is that threat emulation is not like a gotcha test for the red team to do to trick the blue team or to try and show their elite hacker skills or anything like that. The threat emulation is really used to validate the security controls you guys have, bolster the overall security posture, identify whatever coverage gaps we might have, and to create detections from that. So really just having your whole team in there, blue and red, purple team exercises is what we do here, and I love them. I think they're so useful, but just being open with your local defenders and incorporating them and really just using this as an opportunity for everyone to learn is really where you get the most value out of this. That's all that I have. Thanks everybody for joining. I'll turn it back over to Trey.
Thank you, Tyler. But yeah, thanks again for everybody coming out today. I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any other questions that come up. If you're concerned, you've got thoughts, concerns, questions about threat engineering, purple teaming, the other products and services like Empower that we offer here at Scythe, or you just maybe have got a question to follow on after this, please feel free to reach out to us on our socials that we posted earlier in the slides or at proserve@scythe.io. Let's see, you got a quick question here from Justin. So going through the test and understanding them from both sides causes you to learn a lot along the way. It really does. And this is something that I've personally preached to my local communities, that if you've never defended a network before, if you've never had to think about it from the defender's perspective and built, like you've never been an engineer, it's hard to really take advantage of it, right? And know how it's supposed to work and how it's supposed to focus. So seeing it from both sides, working in this kind of hybrid purple team engagements and this thought process will really change your understanding from both sides of the field and make you a better engineer, operator, red team or blue team or defender, whatever you want to be as a whole. Hey, Tyler, we got another CPT guy in here.
Yeah, hey, quick shout out to Nathan over there. Go CPTs, right?
Right? Cool. Yeah, I'll leave it open for another 4 minutes or so for any other questions, comments, concerns that pop up. And then hopefully we will see you guys at the next one. Thanks for joining us.